Lesley appeals to a young and old audience, to students, professionals, homemakers, and business people. In a write-up about her, it was said that she is an inviting, engaging, warm, pragmatic, and widely read professional and extremely experienced. Today, Lesley shares her story with us and teaches us more about defiance, the defiant human spirit. So before we go into Lesley's content, please note that this webinar is being recorded. We will make time towards the end of the webinar for questions and answers, and Lesley will potentially share a presentation on her life story. Before we start, I'd like to ask Jonathan, please, to put up our donation poll. AutoJet is a non-profit organization, and we rely heavily on the funding of the community. We do not charge for any of our webinars, whether they be training, inspirational, whatever they may be. And if you are in a position to make a donation, please could I ask you to tick one of the boxes and then click submit. So having said that, Lesley, I thank you so much for your time this morning. I look forward to the next hour in your presence, and we're going to get started now. Thank you so much.
Sure, Tracy, that was quite an introduction. Thank you so much. And I need to say that before we began this webinar, I was speaking to Tracy, and I would just really like to offer my heart and soul and love and condolences on the loss of her 53-year-old sister from COVID. So I think, I don't know many people who haven't been affected at this time, and I'm one of them, and we all have stories to tell. So what I'm going to endeavor to do, this is the first time I've given this particular talk, is to weave in Frankl's teachings into my story, which I think when you get a little bit more competent, you are able to do. But it's my first time doing this. So let's go. When you hear the word defiance, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? I know what comes to my mind, and that's the word authority. Frankl used the word very, very differently. He used it as one of the most precious human powers that we possess, and that is our defiance and our defiant human spirit. We have a defiant, we all have it, because we've all been through adversities and we've all come through them in our lives. So there's nobody without a defiant human spirit. We often are limited even by our expectations. We expect a disabled child to be totally illiterate. They might be to us, but at a spiritual dimension level, they are something else. Now, when Frankl talks about the spiritual dimension, he also calls it our human realm. And that is where defiance sits. It is where love sits. It is where creativity sits. It's where free will and our authenticity sit. That is what he's referring to when he says the spiritual dimension of a human being. And I would like to read what he actually said in 1985. He said, he described the defiant power of the human spirit as the freedom to take a courageous stance towards fate and the human capacity to transform a tragedy into a triumph. He defined courage in terms of our spiritual dimension. So he believes that moral courage has a spiritual dimension to it. Without this kind of spiritual dimension and this moral fortitude, who would we be? Who would we be to connect with others, to have empathy? Who would we be if we did not have the spiritual dimension? And I might mention, he was the first existential therapist to discover that human beings had a human realm or a spiritual dimension. And his logotherapy speaks directly to that spiritual dimension. So it's not like a courageous person doesn't fear things. We all human, and we all have fears and different fears and some of the same fears. But it's our attitude that we take towards being triumphant. It's our attitude we take, it's our mindset. It's how we view a situation, because we cannot avoid many, many situations, but then it is going to be our attitude towards it, which is called a fate, when we can't avoid something. So everybody has the freedom of will to choose their circumstances. We all can choose that attitude. We all have the freedom to change at any time. We can change from this moment if we choose to. Every situation presents us with a challenge, every single situation. There's no situation that doesn't. But in pain and suffering, we will find that we have to dig very, very deep indeed. And to get to that courage, which is an innate quality in every single one of us. What Frankl said, which I loved, was, it's not what we expect from life, but what life expects from us. And that is the truth of it. We don't choose our circumstances, they choose us. He also says that with meaning, we don't even have to look for meaning, because it will find us, and it will be what he calls self-transcendence, which is reaching beyond yourself for the good of other people. That a meaning is not to be found within, because that's self-actualization. That was his view on it. Okay, so in our darkest hours, we can find meaning in pain and suffering. And I'm going to demonstrate how in a short while. And I'm sure you could all tell a story that demonstrates the very same thing, especially in the last year or two. So for those, I'm sure most of you know, Frankl was an Austrian psychologist, psychiatrist, philosopher, and the inventor of speech therapy, which I just read up. I didn't know that previously. Did you, Pan? No. Yeah. Okay. He had a choice at the time as to whether to go to the concentration, whether to stay with his parents at the time, or to go to America. And he chose at the time, he went to see his dad, and he found a little piece of marble lying on the table in the dining room. And he said to his dad, "What is that little piece of marble?" And his dad said, "It's a piece from one of the commandments. It's a little piece where the temple was destroyed up the road." And he said, "And you know which commandment it is?" And he said, "Yes, thou shalt honor thy mother and father and have a fruitful life." And he did what he said his conscience commanded him to do. He stayed with his parents. Him and his entire family, except for his sister who immigrated to Australia, perished in the camps. And while Frankl was in the camps, he really observed human behavior. And he found a very, very interesting thing in human behavior. It wasn't the physically fittest that survived. It was the people that had had a rich inner life, that could reflect back on their memories.
Really?
And this rich inner life kept lots and lots of people going, whether or not they survived or they didn't, but it gave them the grit to keep going from moment to moment, day to day. So I'm going to just read Frankl's work, by the way. His moral philosophy work covered the defiant human spirit. It covered responsibility and choices. We all make responsible choices, or should, as adults. It also covered self-transcendence, which is reaching beyond yourself for the good of others. And it also involved a meaning mindset. Those were his 4 philosophical statutes there. What I want to read you now, I want to say we all have a story. We all have many stories that inform our lives. We are all going through turbulent times. We all are learning, growing, suffering, whatever we're doing in these times. And some of us are having amazing experiences through it all. I'd like to read you now a little letter that a friend from Cyprus sent me on the 5th of October, which was Daniel's birthday. And my birthday, okay, you'll hear. We all have a story or stories that define us and inform our lives. Dear Daniel, I do not believe in an afterlife or a Christian, Jewish other God. Hence, I can't believe that you would receive and read this email. Yet I want to say you lived a life well worth remembering and sharing stories about. As your birthday and that of your mother are so close, it will be hard for her to separate pain and joy, grief and hope. Yet that is what has always defined her. Life is at times unreal, too tough on some and unfairly easy on others. Some cry over a torn fingernail or a failed dish in the oven. Some forget to cry at all. Whatever it is that Lesley will be doing today and tomorrow or any other day, her tears are always worth crying. And it was my 70th birthday the following day, and I really, really had the most joyful time with family and some friends. And so, yeah, I was able to move on from that very first milestone. So this is how my story goes, and I'd love to hear your stories. Maybe we can connect. I've got a channel called Share Your Story on Facebook. So I'm married, I've got 2 beautiful boys. I'm on a course to make money. I'm in a recruitment business. I'm employing lots of people. And I'm going to be married happily ever after. And at 7 months old, Daniel's right eye starts jumping. And I schlepped him from doctor to doctor and ophthalmologist to ophthalmologist. And they ended up saying that I was neurotic and gave me pills. At 1 year old, Daniel's irises started rotating. I remember it was on a Saturday at the lunch table. And it was then discovered Daniel had a brain tumor spreading from the frontal lobe on both optics and going right to the back of the brain. And the prognosis was very, very grim, very grim. A 48-hour prognosis by 11 different doctors. But we went to healers, Filipino healers were here at the time. And I had the privilege of being able to contact the Rebbe. Now, the Rebbe, for those that don't know, it was or is, they still consider the Lubavitch Jewish people still consider him to be present. And he really was a master, I've got to say, just a master. And his intuition and his knowledge just spread to realms that we couldn't imagine. And when I got hold of the Rebbe, it was a few times I got hold of him. The first time I said, I've got 13 mezuzahs in the doorways. Is that good? He said, if you've got 13, it's good. Then it's good. And then I said to him, look, this is the situation with my son. And he said, this soul will make it. And that was the first time I'd heard anybody with any hope. And I took that on board. I just took that on board. I thought, if this wise man of God is saying this soul will make it, I'm taking that on board. And from then I cancelled his 12-hour, I found a surgeon finally to operate on him, who also gave him a 48-hour prognosis and said that if he survived, he would be in a vegetative state. But I said, that's fine. I'll have him in any state that I'm offered, and I will look after him to the best of my capacity. And I fulfilled that promise until the very end. I really fulfilled that promise. I feel good with myself. I feel very good with myself on that score. Yeah. Daniel, yeah, so he had the operation. He survived. He lay on a bed for 3 years. And then finally he took his first steps, and he said his first word. And from then on he progressed. He progressed in a Daniel way, not in a conventional IQ way, but he progressed with EQ and a spiritual intelligence that I connected with and learned from at every moment in my life. Every moment in my life. I just learned so many things from him. So after that 12-hour operation, I saw a nurse wrapping up equipment, and I detached myself from the equipment, and I said, did this soul make it? And she said, yes, he made it. And Daniel did make it. And Jonathan also, my other son, did make it. In fact, I think his background with Daniel being so ill, he was 6 years at home before he went to a home. And I think it really shaped his life in that he became a doctor, anesthetist, ICU, all the hectic stuff became his forte. Because it was hectic at home. It was very, very hectic at home in his informative years. Daniel and I, for 35 years, it was mainly Daniel and I. I've got to say that we were very connected. And I would originally fetch him on weekends. And then I got wiser in the last few years, where I fetched him in the afternoons, had him home for dinner, watered him and gave him food, and sent him back about 3 or 4 times a week. So that basically was the Daniel story until the 27th of March last year, lockdown, and Daniel became ill. He went to hospital, and from then on, it was like an airplane crash. He went, the hospital forgot his meds for 3 days and nights. He went onto a ventilator, adrenal failure, kidney failure, every failure under the sun. And finally, he actually got better. And he was due to go to rehab, but unfortunately, they tested him for COVID, and he had COVID. So he was then in hospital for 11 months, and that included the rehab, and he was home for 3.5 months, where we had the most extraordinary time, not only at home, but in the hospital. And I remember there's so many memories, but on one very deep and dark day, and I have to laugh about it when I think of it, I looked at Daniel and I said to him, do you know what, boy, I'll do anything for you to make you feel better, anything. And he said, he looked at me and he thought tentatively, and then he said, Mom, will you sing She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain? And he took me totally unawares. But that was Daniel. He took people totally unawares. Had a very, very rich life in that he loved his religion. He loved nature. He loved animals. He loved people unconditionally. he loved. He knew how to love, and he showed me what love was and how to love. He actually, and gave me so much unconditional love. He had a very rich life in that he sang to students in workshops, and he would sing in all the languages, though he couldn't read or write. And I would briefly tell his story, and that would open them up to their stories, the students. So it was a very cathartic workshop, which he called the crying workshops. And when are we going to the crying workshops? Even in hospital, he asked me, when are we going to the crying workshops? The hospital was a very, very hard and tough experience. I can't deny that. Very tough. Seeing him suffer was worse for me. As we know, we'd rather be doing the suffering as mothers. However, there were light moments, and he'd look out into the garden and he'd say, look at the trees and look at the birds and the nests and look at this, and he would just, and Frankl called that an avenue to meaning. And those are our creative values, what we create. Those are our experiential values, what we experience from the world out there. And he would drag the nurses. That was something else he experienced. And we would all laugh. And I got a huge respect for everyone in that hospital. On his birthday last year, his 35th birthday, or was it the year before? When was it? He's 36, sorry. He sang he commanded me to go and call all the nurses and doctors, and he sang in Nkosi Sikelel for them, which he had done at many workshops previously, including at UNISA for our logotherapy workshops. And it was just such a joyous time. The neurologist at the time made a little speech, and he was so right when he said, and Daniel is the hero here. And that was the actual truth. It was a very, very tough period. In October, my cousin, who's not on this webinar right now, but she took myself and her two sisters, who are here, for an evening away for one night. And I had a carer looking after Daniel. She had looked after him in childhood. She came just with pure love. She didn't want payment or anything. She came to look after Daniel in rehab for 3 months. And we just had joyous times. She nurtured me and she nurtured him, and we had fun and laughter and we had memories. So amongst all this grief and this hardship and this illness, there was all this lightness and laughter. But more than this, when I went away for the night, I asked a friend to help me to fetch Gladys from our home, take her to the rehab and bring her home. But he said, couldn't I find someone else? So I found someone else, and his name was Amir. He had been to my home many times, but when I found him, we began the love affair of my life, I have to say. It was the love affair of my life. And how does Frankl, how does he describe love? What is love? It's meeting someone in their uniqueness and in your uniqueness as well, and merging in that spiritual dimension where you are in your uniqueness. Okay, he also describes it as holding the space with no judgment. For a person to realize their potential, and in you realizing it, they reach their potential. That's how he also describes love. And so Amir came into my life and Danny's life. He received a lot of love from Danny and I. For me, I believe he learned to love. I think I cracked the nut open, so did Daniel. However, he gave us so much. Music, nature, humor. Humor is another one of the soul's weapons, as Frankl describes it. And it sits in your spiritual dimension, because we don't think I'm going to be humorous now if it's a spontaneous humor. So this was in this complete. Daniel was now in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk any longer. He was in terrible pain. There were painkillers. There were care workers. This house was hectic. I even took someone in. I gave him a room just to help lift Daniel at the time. But we were having fun because Amir was singing on the guitar, and him and I were going into the country whenever we could and having fun in nature. And we just he loved animals, he loved hiking, he taught me a new way of nutrition, which was no meat, etc. And it did me a lot of good. It did me a lot of good at that time. So Daniel was taken to hospital. So in the meantime, Amir is in my life and everything is wonderful and everything is terrible with Daniel, but it was compensated with all this joy. And then came the day when Daniel got very ill and I had to take him for the final time to the hospital. And as much as I had encouraged Daniel to live, I also had to encourage Daniel to let go. So he had a bad pneumonia, and the doctor said, look, I'm going to respect your wishes and not put him on a ventilator again. And that was my wish. I'd written it in his files. And he said, look, he's got very bad pneumonia, and he is going to pass. And I remember Daniel looking intently as he heard those words. I felt him looking, although I was talking to the doctor. And that was difficult. That was difficult. But I sat with him for 5 days, 6 days, day and night. On the Friday, I was with my friend Aviva, who's on this webinar. Thank you. And yeah, she brought a siddur. She had been brought up very religiously, and so had remembered all her songs and the Shema and everything else. And she sang. She not only brought me tea, coffee, wine, and sandwiches, but she sang every Hebrew song, every prayer that she could from the siddur. And then we played him, as he called him, Pavarotti. We played a lot of Pavarotti to him. And we had a joyous evening. His brother came to see him, and his friend Shondi came to see him. Not that he could respond, but he knew they were there. And the next day, yeah, I had to say to Daniel that day, as I was holding his hand, in the morning, he let go of my hand, and I said to him, Danny, I hadn't told him his dad had passed on the 28th of June, 2020. I said, Danny, you are going to fly like a bird to Hashem, to God, and there, waiting for you, will be your daddy and your granny and your grandpa. And these are the words that were so meaningful. At this moment, I knew what Frankel's work, what he was talking about, how life was so transient, how we cannot reverse our lives, they're irreversible, how precious every moment is. And he called those meaning moments. And meaning moments can often add up to a calling in life. And a calling can often land up being a purpose. As I say, we don't have to pursue that purpose. And that was the story of Daniel. In the meantime, Amir was supporting me now from hospital. He had broken his arm and was very stubborn. He didn't have it set. He thought it would self-heal, although Jonathan told him to get it done that day. He didn't listen. And he was in agony for about 3 weeks. Absolute agony with this arm that he got strapped up, and And finally, after 3 weeks, he realized he needed it operated on. And it was operated on. It was successful, but the 3 weeks had lowered his immune system because he was a very healthy guy, hiking and vegetarianism and whatever. And yeah, and he got COVID. And he started battling with that COVID. And I knew that things were bad when I said, I'm getting you a carer. And he said, fine, because I knew he wasn't the type that was going to take a carer. And when he said to me, don't bring chocolate here anymore, then I knew he was very sick because he liked chocolate. And and my role changed. My role, like Frankl says, love and happiness cannot be pursued. They must ensue. And I was so happy with his messages and talking to him. Even whilst he was in the hospital, he wasn't able to attend Daniel's funeral because he was in hospital, but he came out and we had great fun again. And before he got the COVID, and I saw him the Saturday before he died, and he died on the Tuesday at lunchtime. And I said to him, what has this pain and suffering brought to you? What has it taught you? He said, it's taught me to be humble, to not impose my views on anyone else, because he loved doing that with his theories, his conspiracy theories. He said, I won't be doing that again, he says. I do not think, in some way, I think he expected to die. And in some ways, he didn't. I was speaking to him the whole morning on the Tuesday before he died on the 3rd of August. And I was organizing a vegetarian curry for him. And his last words were, he phoned me up and through the oxygen and whatever, he said, not necessary. He often said that word, it's not necessary. Not necessary to make dinner. We can just eat mangoes. So those were his last words, not necessary to bring the curry and to find me dead. And I thought that was the most loving thing that he ever could have done to me and for me. And yeah, I think this courage that we find and this defiant human spirit is just so, as I said earlier, innate within all of us. It's an inner choice, it's an inner freedom, whether we choose to exercise it or not through hard times. And since the hard times, I've had very joyful times with my friends, with my birthday, with the love and support of family and friends. And yeah, the parties carried on. The parties carried on for a whole week, because when you can party, boy, you party. That's what you do. Hey, everyone. Yeah. Anyway, so what the 3 avenues to meaning that Frankl talked about in our lives was what I said, what we experience. We experience love, joy, sunsets, sunrises. What we create in our lives, we create our work, we create our tasks, we create our relationships, we create our artworks, we create our writings, we create. Those are called our creative values. That's what we give to the world. The experiential values are what we get from the world. And the thing that he said most is that when we can endure pain and suffering with moral courage, then that is the 3rd meaning, and probably the hugest meaning in our lives, when we all endure that pain, suffering with courage and dignity, and with our heads held up high. I'd like to just read you the 2 little eulogies that I wrote for Daniel and Amir, and I'll probably read Daniel's first. Yeah, where have I got it? Right here. Some of you were at the funeral, so you'll remember some of it. Okay. I just can tell you that the rabbi did cry at Daniel's funeral, and he did say, I don't often say this, but he was a pure soul, and I believe he's going straight to Hashem. And that was the most touching, poignant funeral that I've ever been to. That was also beautiful, beautiful, beautiful funeral. Danny, or Dinks as I called him, thank you for choosing me as your mom. You were my special birthday gift, being born the day before my birthday. He often said, I love everybody and everybody loves me. And he got it right. Daniel greeted everyone in their language with such love and warmth, whether it was a beggar in the street or the teller at Pick and Pay. I was fortunate enough to spend almost the last 14 months with him, and I encouraged him through his worst times by telling him that he was Daniel from the Lion's Den, or he was winning the race, or he was Michael Shoemaker, as he liked to call him. He also adored food and music, and Pavarotti, as he called him, was his favorite, although he lately sang When You're Smiling and Que Sera, Sera. What a warrior and what a character you were. We had amazing times together. We laughed, we cried, you were trying, and your swearing took much to be desired. But mostly we had such fun and joy and laughter, and my soul went on an amazing journey in these years, 36 years. It's hard to mention people but name, but Shandi was definitely your best friend and partner in crime in watching the rugby. You are and will continue to be loved by many students who sang in Nkosi Sikelele 4, and by all the people at Selwyn Siegel and all your family and friends who had the honor of meeting you in your short life. Plaston, Amos, Happy, and Wesley were especially important to you and did so much for you, and you gave back so lovingly. You remain indelible in my heart, mind, and soul, and I cherish all our memories together, my boyki. We had a connection that is eternal and will never be broken. I love you with all my heart and soul. Hashem has gained a very old and wise soul, and we have lost one. I would like to give thanks to my son, Jonathan, who saved Daniel's life on many occasions and gave me the opportunity to spend the most precious resource of all, and that was valuable time with Danny. And I now would like to read, I've got it on my phone, just the little eulogy that I wrote for Amir. We called each other Sweets. Sweets, you came into my life in my darkest hour. Our connection took us into nature, brought joy, growth, and laughter to us both, and most importantly, brought music and love to me and my late son, Daniel. You will be with me always. Love you. He called me Amy because I was always at rehab with Daniel, alias Lesley. And that is my concluding eulogy to both those precious loves in my life. And for you that have lost loved ones, I'm sure you talk to them all the time. And the scary part for me is that they actually answer me. More Amir than Daniel, I must say. Daniel seems to have gone to somewhere very far away. But I would welcome any of your stories and some of your questions at this time. And we do still have time. We have about, almost 15 minutes or so for questions. Are there any questions, anybody? None.
Lesley, I would like to say that,
Yes.
that your story is so inspiring. And when I read the content that you sent me, you said, what you have lived through and what you have been through would seem like a movie or perhaps surreal to others. But for me, you are such an amazingly strong woman. And to have gone through so much with such grace, such dignity, and such optimism to get you to where you are today is truly remarkable. Susan has said, you're an inspiration to us, all the comments are coming through. You're an inspiration to us. You've had a very hard time in this COVID. Your strength is amazing. Carolyn has asked me if you could just talk a little bit more about Frankel's theories, which she enjoyed. So I think let's go over to that for our last few minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay, there could still be a few more questions. They won't take me long, his theories. The three avenues to meaning, Karen, are what you give to the world, so what you create in your life, whether it be writing, artwork, relationships. It's what you give to the world. It's your gifts that you are giving. The second, and he called that creative values. The second avenue to meaning is what life gives you for mahala, for absolutely free. We get that oxygen, sunrises, sunsets, birds, trees, nature. I mean, there's too much to mention what we get for free. A smile, just a smile when you're driving in a car, that's for free, and it makes your day. Or a nice, beautiful word from someone, that is for free. That is what he calls your experiential, what you get from the world. And the third thing is going through your pain and suffering, because we all have it. We all have pain, suffering, and death. And the dignity and the courage that you go through this with, because it is your attitude towards it that matters. He also had three other tenets, Karen, and I'll just tell you very quickly, and that's free will. That's how you think. And then your will to meaning, which is where if you don't fulfill yourself with someone to love or something to do or something to look forward to, you get what they call the existential vacuum, which is a hole in the soul, essentially, and leads to addiction and negativity, etc. And then he called the last thing the meaning of life. And it's what I mentioned in my talk. It's the transitoriness of life that we need to look at, and the irreversibility of it, and the moment to moment of it, because there is joy in suffering as well, and pain. And I think that is the main message, if anything, that I'd like to get through today, is that there was so much joy in the pain and suffering. And Daniel had so much joy towards the end. We went to roadhouses with ice creams and on drives and rhino parks. And yes, he was insecure without his wheelchair now, but hey, he still enjoyed his life. And that was such an inspiration. What an inspiration he was to me and many others. If I would go to the shops, people would say, hello, Daniel. And who are you, my dear? They would say to me. He was well known all over the place and well loved. So I hope that answers your question, Karen. Does anyone else have a question? Robin? What a beautiful share, dearest Lesley. I've been so touched. What did you say, Pan? I want to read yours, Pan. I'll read this first. Hang on. Let me see what I've got here. Tracy.
Pan said, what a beautiful share, dearest Lesley. I have been so touched because in just knowing you and Daniel has been such a blessing to my life. Thank you for sharing. You honor Frankel's work and logotherapy, as well as your dear son, who I will always remember. That is from Pan.
And Susie?
I don't see a comment from Susie.
Liz, you're an inspiration to us. You've had a very hard time in this COVID. Your strength is amazing. Thank you, Susie. So is yours. And what a friend you've been to me. From Caroline to everyone, please talk more on Frankel's theories. Yes, you could come for a few lessons, Caroline, if you'd like that. I did just talk on a few of his theories. He's got something for everything. So it's a lot to talk about. Philip says, I'm reading Frankl's Victor's Search for Meaning for just the second or third time. I'm truly defiant. Is that what you're saying? It's truly defiant. Yeah, it's truly defiant. What a man. And you read Pan's one, right? Thank you for that.
See, Robin has a hand raised. Robin?
Oh, okay.
Yes,
hi, Rob.
I just want to say that I wouldn't
That's
have
my
actually...
sister, everyone in England.
Hello everyone.
Hello, my darling. Why can't I see you?
I don't know, because I'm...
Can you maybe switch your camera on?
Okay, there we go. No, it's because Zoom won't allow it. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't look as gorgeous as my older sister.
You're the older one. What are you talking about?
Listen, I just want to say that I'm speaking from experience. And I just want to say that I wouldn't have got through the last few years without my sister. It doesn't have to be death. It can just be hard times. And she has been absolutely, unbelievably incredible. And she lives what she speaks, and she speaks sense. And she's wonderful, and I love her.
And I love you too, Robs. So love you. Thank you for that endorsement. Wow. Thank you.
So Lesley, you may share your logotherapy training website in the chat box with everybody.
Okay, let me just find it. I don't know how to find it on my desktop right now. But I'm sure if they need me, I do trauma counseling and other counseling, logotherapy style, neuroscience coaching, hypnotherapy, and sometimes combine, make a combination. My telephone number is 083 325 3532, and my email address is baron@iafrica.com. And yeah, I obviously love doing talks, and this has been the first talk on this particular subject. There's something in the chat as well. Let me just see.
It's your website.
Okay, I'm trying to get to it.
I have a question that says, do you do hypnotherapy for flying, for fear of flying?
Yes, hypnotherapy is very good for many fears, as is NLP. There are techniques in NLP as well for phobias. And I do that as well, so yeah. Yes, would be the answer. I'm sorry I can't get to my PowerPoint unless I exit the full screen. There, I can do that now, right? Let me just make it smaller, then I can get to it. Let's see if I can actually...
Lesley, I have further shared your PowerPoint with everyone that's on the call, so they will receive a copy of it.
Thank you.
But for me, Lesley, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story. Very often we feel that we are the only ones going through something, and there's so many of us going through different things in our lives. I think what makes it all more tangible, believable, real is the fact that we're never alone. And for me, the words that I can offer to everyone on the call is, you never know how incredibly blessed you really are until tragedy strikes in your life, and the people that you have around you, the support that you have around you, the love and the friendship that you have around you. I encourage everyone just to be appreciative and grateful for that, because I know for me personally, it's really helped me in so many different ways. So before we close off today's session, Lesley, I thank you for sharing your story. Thank you to everyone for joining us, for your time this morning. And I hope you all take away some key meaning or key insight into your lives going forward. Before we end off today, I'm going to ask one more time for Jonathan to please put up the OUGHT donation poll. Again, if you are in a position to make a donation to OUGHT, as Lesley started saying, you know, COVID has affected so many people on an emotional, financial, business level, and OUGHT is here to continue upskilling, empowering, and training business people to become successful and to ensure that their businesses succeed, all through our training, mentorship, and networking opportunities. I invite you all to watch out for the OUGHT calendar, which is in the communication attached to this presentation. Please join us for online networking, as well as a host of other business training sessions. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Lesley, and all your friends and family who were on the call as well. And we look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.